I knew I shouldn't have come, but I came anyway. Not to be seen, because I knew they wouldn't look, but to remind myself why I had disappeared. My sister's engagement party was everything I expected it to be: flawless, expensive, over-decorated. The kind of place where people wear names like medals. Where champagne doesn't come in glasses, it comes in crystal. Where family is more about appearances than connection. I arrived a few minutes late. Not on purpose, not to make an entrance, but because I waited in my car for 12 minutes, watching through the tinted glass as old relatives I hadn't seen in a decade passed through the grand entrance like they'd been waiting for this day their whole lives. When I finally walked in, no one turned. My brother passed right by me in the hallway. He looked at me, or through me, I'm not sure. He muttered a cold, "Didn't think you were coming," without stopping. And my mother. God, my mother. She stood by the buffet, gold bangles clinking as she laughed with some man in a navy suit. When she finally noticed me, her expression didn't change. No smile, no welcome. Just a single glance, as if seeing me had confirmed some quiet disappointment. Then she turned back to her conversation. "Please don't make a scene," she said later, pulling me aside like I was some hired help. "Tonight's not about you." The air inside the banquet hall was thick with perfume and polished ambition. White lilies draped over every table. String lights hung from the ceiling like constellations, reflected in the oversized chandelier above us. Everyone wore black or gold. I wore gray. Not by choice, it's just all I had that still fit. I stood near the back, far from the laughter and toasts, beside a pillar where I could blend into the wallpaper. My name wasn't on the seating chart. No one had made space for me at any table. The bride-to-be, my sister, Madeline, was radiant, of course. That kind of effortless beauty that always made people assume she was kind. She wore a backless white dress, her hair twisted in some perfect updo. When she took the mic for her speech, she opened with a joke about how hard it had been picking which sister to stand beside her, since technically she only had one. People laughed. Some turned to look at me. I didn't laugh. No one mentioned me in the speeches. Not once. Not even when they listed family members who helped raise the bride. Not even when they talked about those who shaped her life. I kept thinking, maybe I really was that forgettable. Maybe I had been erased on purpose. Because when you leave without saying goodbye, people don't leave a door open for your return. Still, there was something in me that hadn't let go. Something stupid and small and hopeful that thought maybe someone would ask. Ask what I'd been doing all these years. Ask why I looked tired behind the eyes. Ask what I'd built, what I'd lost. But no one asked. All they saw was the girl who'd left and never looked back. The disappointment, the silence at holidays, the absence in family photos. No one saw the nights I stayed awake protecting people they'd never meet. No one saw the other version of me, the one who knew too much, trusted too little, and lived in shadows. Tonight, I was just the extra guest. The one who didn't belong. And when I caught Madeline's gaze across the room, her perfect smile still plastered in place, I could swear she mouthed something. Not hello, not I missed you, but enjoy what I built without me. And I realized maybe she knew. Maybe they all did. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time, brief, almost forgotten, when I was loud, fierce. The kind of child who asked too many questions at dinner, who climbed trees in dresses, who came home with scraped knees and stories no one wanted to hear. I was stubborn, yes, but I was alive, and maybe that was the problem. My father hated how much space I took. "You talk too much," he used to say, eyes never leaving his newspaper. "Let your brother speak." My mother would just sigh, her disappointment so practiced it felt like part of her breathing. It didn't take long for me to learn. In our family, silence was safer than truth. I remember one Thanksgiving, maybe I was 12, when I tried to tell them I'd won the regional science fair. I was proud. It had taken weeks of work, and I'd built the whole project myself. But before I even finished the sentence, Madeline cut me off to show her new ballet costume. Everyone clapped. I stood there, holding the certificate, forgotten. That was the first time I didn't try again. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped coming downstairs for breakfast. By 18, I had a packed duffel bag hidden in my closet. No one noticed when I started working nights at a gas station 2 towns over. I told them I was studying late. They never asked for proof. I left the morning after Madeline's high school graduation. No note, no hugs, just the sound of my boots on the front porch as I walked into the world without a plan. For years I drifted, took odd jobs, bartending, cleaning motel rooms, filing papers in offices where no one knew my name. But then something changed. It started with a woman I met in a bus terminal. She was in her late 40s, wore a military-style jacket, and had this calm that made you want to stand straighter. We got to talking, and before I knew it, I was being interviewed. For what? I didn't fully understand. It wasn't the military, but it was adjacent. Something deeper. Something classified. They saw something in me. Something my family never did. By the time I was 23, I was fluent in 3 languages and could dismantle a surveillance system in under 2 minutes. I trained in deserts, cities, forests. I learned how to disappear in plain sight, how to listen for lies, how to carry secrets. They called us analysts, but it was never just that. We were watchers, shadows, ghosts in foreign lands. We prevented chaos before it began. And sometimes we did things that never made the news, but saved lives anyway. I saw things that would destroy most people. I lost teammates whose names will never be carved into any wall. I sat across from men who smiled as they lied about bombs, weapons, betrayals. And I stayed silent, not because I was afraid, but because that silence kept people safe. Still, I never told my family. Not even once. Why would I? To them, I was the girl who ran away. The one who couldn't handle rules. The disappointment. At some point, my last name stopped being mine. I used aliases so often I forgot how my own signature looked. Birthdays passed in cold countries. Holidays in safe houses. But I never called. Never wrote. And no one ever reached out. Sometimes, I'd search their names online just to see. I watched from a distance as Madeline became a lawyer, then some kind of public figure. Always in the papers for charity work, for speeches at fancy galas. My parents clung to her success like it made up for everything else. Once, I saw a family photo in a magazine spread. My mother, father, Madeline, and my brother Nathan, smiling beneath a banner that read The Graysons, Legacy in Motion. I wasn't in it, not even a mention. I zoomed in on the frame above the fireplace. My face had been cropped out. They had rewritten the past, and in their version, I never existed. I should have felt anger. I should have wanted to scream. But all I felt was tired, so I let them have their illusion, their tidy, perfect narrative, until last week, when a nondescript envelope landed on my desk. No return address. Just a single photo inside, Madeline's engagement party invitation. I shouldn't have gone, but some part of me, some wounded, reckless part, needed to see it. Not for closure, not for connection, but because I wanted to see what they'd built without me. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted them to see what they'd lost. The laughter was loud, too loud. It ricocheted off the marble walls, polished to such a shine that I could see the reflection of people pretending to love each other. The clink of glasses, the crescendo of music, the flashes of cameras, all of it swirled into a blur of celebration that made me feel like I was underwater, drowning beneath layers of silk and secrets. Madeline had just finished her speech, and the applause was thunderous. She stood at the center of the ballroom like she belonged there, because she did. She always had, flanked by her fiancé, and surrounded by people who adored her. People who saw her. I started to move toward the exit. I'd seen enough. I'd stayed too long already. But then someone called my name. No, not my name. Not the one they knew me by. It was barely audible at first, a voice through the crowd. Ren. I froze. Ren was a name no one here should know. Not even my family. It wasn't my birth name. It was the one I was given when I was recruited. It was the name I answered to in rooms with no windows, under lights that never flickered. I turned slowly. A man stood near the coat check, dressed in a dark suit with no tie. He looked ordinary enough, but I recognized him instantly. Davenport. He wasn't just anyone. He was my field liaison. The kind of man who didn't show up unless something was burning. "What are you doing here?" I asked under my breath, my tone low and sharp. He didn't answer. Just handed me a phone. A burner. It was already connected. On the screen, a message blinked and read, "Operation compromised. Immediate decision required." I felt the air shift. My skin tingled, my pulse quickened. This wasn't protocol. We had channels, layers, buffers. No one ever reached out like this. Not unless it was bad. Not unless it was urgent. And certainly not in public. You have 5 minutes, Davenport said quietly. After that, we're no longer in control. I clenched my jaw, my mind already working. Locations, codes, contacts. But part of me remained painfully aware of where I was. The music, the laughter, the fact that just a few feet away, my sister was toasting to a future I wasn't part of. I turned back toward the ballroom and locked eyes with Madeline. She was watching me now, really watching. A flicker of something crossed her face. Confusion, recognition, maybe even fear. Then, without warning, the microphone crackled again. The MC, a man I didn't recognize, returned to the stage with a wide smile. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the next performance, we have a very special surprise for the bride and groom, he announced. One of Madeline's oldest family members has agreed to say a few words. Applause. Confetti. The spotlight scanned the crowd, then landed on me. People turned. Faces shifted. Whispers bloomed like wildfire. I hadn't agreed to anything. Nathan was already on his feet, hurrying toward me. His jaw tight, his eyes cold. This isn't your moment, he hissed. Don't make this about you. Again. I didn't move, but I didn't back down either. Davenport stepped closer. You need to decide. Now. The phone in my hand buzzed again, this time with a string of numbers that made my stomach drop. Coordinates. Ones I recognized. Ones that meant only one thing: the safe house was breached. We were exposed. Everything went quiet in my head, except for a single sound, Madeline's voice from earlier, echoing in my mind. Enjoy what I built, without me. She had said it like a jab, like a victory. But now, looking at her, I wondered, was it something else? A warning? The MC, clearly confused by the delay, spoke again. Well, perhaps our surprise guest is feeling shy. She's not shy, Nathan snapped. She's not supposed to be here. A few people gasped. Madeline stepped forward, her brows furrowed. Nathan, stop. But he wouldn't. She's the disgrace. The one who left. The one who couldn't even be bothered to show up for Dad's funeral. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had known he resented me. I just didn't realize how much. The room was silent now. Everyone watching. Waiting. Then a new voice cut through it all. Loud, clear, commanding. Agent Ren Gray. Every head turned. A man in a black tactical uniform stood just inside the main entrance. His voice carried like a blade. Permission to interrupt this gathering under urgent federal protocol. Gasps. Murmurs. The man stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket. An ID badge. Unmistakably real, glinting beneath the chandeliers. I need your decision now, ma'am, he said, locking eyes with me. Your team is standing by. Madeline's jaw dropped. My mother covered her mouth. Nathan's face went pale. And I, slowly, deliberately, stepped out from behind the pillar. The uniformed man saluted. Orders from Director Holt, he added. We move on your command. I didn't say anything. I just looked around the room, at the people who once told me I'd never be anyone. And I realized they still didn't understand who I was. But they would. For a moment, no one moved. The music had stopped, but the silence was heavier than sound. It pressed down on everyone in the room, thick and electric, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I felt every eye turn toward me, but I didn't flinch. Not when the man in uniform addressed me again, this time louder. Deputy Field Director Gray, he said clearly, lifting his badge once more, we need your authorization to initiate the blackout protocol for the Triangulum breach. The agency is on standby. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. My name, my title, spoken out loud. In this place, in front of them, I could see the confusion spreading like wildfire across the room. Murmurs rising, hands tightening around champagne flutes. People who had ignored me all night, now leaning forward, trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. My brother Nathan took a step back. His eyes darted between me and the man in black, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that was crumbling in his hands. My mother didn't speak. Her lips were parted, her expression frozen somewhere between denial and disbelief. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. And Madeline was the only one who moved. Slowly, she stepped off the stage, heels silent against the marble floor. Her gaze locked on mine. Her face was unreadable, but her shoulders, they dropped slightly. Not in defeat, in understanding. She knew. She had known something. I took a step forward, away from the wall that had hidden me all evening. The agent straightened to attention. We have agents on site at the New Point perimeter. The window is closing. If we don't act now. You have my authorization, I said, my voice steady. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. I turned slightly, enough for the entire room to hear without question. Initiate blackout. Use the contingency fallback and reroute the asset to Tier 4. Full lockdown. Yes, ma'am, the agent responded. Then into his earpiece, Director Gray confirmed. Proceed. He turned sharply and exited the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. I let it settle. I let them feel the weight of what they'd heard. Then I turned to face the crowd, truly looking at them for the first time. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the servers had stopped walking. Some of you have been wondering where I've been all these years, I said, my voice still low, still unshaken. Wondering what became of the girl who walked out and never came back. I looked at my mother, her eyes wide. At some point, you decided I was a failure. A runaway. A disappointment. I turned slightly toward Nathan, who looked like he was gripping the edge of reality itself. You never asked why I left. You never asked what I found. I paused, letting the silence fill the cracks they'd all ignored for so long. For the past 12 years, I've worked under a classified division within the Bureau. I've trained in 10 countries, led operations in 5 of them. I've stopped attacks you'll never hear about, buried friends whose names aren't allowed to be spoken. And tonight, while you were giving speeches and posing for pictures, I was called here because someone decided that even now, even after all of it, I had to see this moment. I let the truth drop like stones in a still pond. A few people sat down, stunned. Some lowered their heads. And then, slowly, quietly, one of the older guests stood up. A man in a navy blue blazer I vaguely remembered from childhood. He looked at me with something between awe and apology. I had no idea, he said softly. He wasn't alone. One by one, others stood. Not in a cheer. Not in celebration. But in recognition. And then Madeline spoke. She didn't step forward. She didn't cry. Her voice was clear, but softer than I'd ever heard it. She told me, she said, nodding toward the agent who had left. Not everything. Just enough. I stared at her, unsure whether to feel betrayed or seen. I didn't tell them because I knew they wouldn't understand. She stepped closer now, only a few feet away. They were proud of me for winning awards, for finishing school, for looking polished. But you, her voice trembled, just slightly. You were out there doing real work. Dangerous, quiet work. Work they could never have imagined. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Not yet. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the rush of standing this naked in front of people who once told me I was nothing. Then from somewhere near the bar, someone clapped. Slowly, hesitantly. Then another. And another. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. Enough to know they'd heard me. Enough to know something had shifted. Not just in them, but in me. I didn't stay for the rest of the party. The clapping faded as quickly as it began, swallowed by the uncertainty that still hung in the room like smoke after a fire. I walked toward the exit without looking back, my footsteps echoing across the marble floor. No one tried to stop me. Not my mother. Not Nathan. Not even Madeline. Outside, the air was cooler than I remembered. Crisp. Honest. The night sky stretched wide above the estate's iron gates, blank and dark, just as it always had been. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't covering my tracks or running data through secure lines in a war room no one knew existed. I was just me, and I didn't know what to do with that. Davenport waited by the car, one of ours, discreet but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. His eyes met mine, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. We'd worked together long enough to understand silence. You could have called me, I murmured, standing beside him. We didn't need this theater. He gave a slight nod, then said, "You were starting to believe them. That you were nobody." I looked back at the mansion behind me. Through the tall glass windows, I could see the shimmer of gowns, the slow return of music. My family had resumed their performance. "They weren't supposed to find out like that," I said. "No," he agreed. "But sometimes truth demands its own stage." I got into the car and closed the door behind me, shutting out the noise of that world, the one I never truly belonged to. As we drove away, I let my thoughts drift. I remember being 9, sitting on the cold tile floor of our kitchen, listening to my mother scold me for always being so intense. I remembered standing in the rain on my 16th birthday because no one had come to pick me up from school. I remembered the look in my father's eyes the day I told him I was leaving the relief. And I remember the years that followed, the blood, the silence, the faces I'd memorized and the places I'd burned into my mind so I'd never forget why I did what I did. I remember the children we saved in a village no map listed, the colleague who died whispering a code into my ear so the others could live. All of it real, all of it mine. They had never known me, and they never tried. They saw a version of me that fit into their narrative, messy, rebellious, embarrassing, and they locked me into it so they could pretend their perfect family hadn't fractured long before I left. But tonight that illusion shattered, not because I needed them to see me, but because I had to remember that I still existed outside of their story, that I'd built a life with my own hands, hard, ugly and raw, but real. As we reached the edge of the city, my phone buzzed. A single message from an encrypted channel. "Thank you. Mission successful. Full recovery. You made the right call." I stared at the screen for a long moment before powering it off. I didn't need praise. I didn't need medals or parades. But for the first time, I allowed myself to feel something like peace. Not joy, not triumph, just the quiet acceptance that I had survived what they didn't even know I'd endured. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and thought about the look on Madeline's face when the agent said my title. The flicker of something between pride and regret, and I realized maybe she hadn't hated me after all. Maybe she had been just as trapped by expectations, just as suffocated by the story our parents forced on us. But it didn't matter anymore. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't wait for their apology. I wouldn't explain again. Let them sit with what they'd learned. Let them try to reconcile the ghost they'd buried with the woman who walked out under her own name. They didn't know me anything, and I didn't know them forgiveness. Just silence. That I could offer freely. As the car turned down a quiet side street, I looked once more out the window, back toward the horizon where that house still sat glowing like a lie wrapped in gold. And I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "Tonight, they finally saw me. But they don't get to keep me." Because this time, I wasn't leaving in shame. I was choosing to walk away. Whole. Known. Free.